Now then, over the past 5 years that he's been the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford has seen and asked questions of 4 different Prime Ministers. So, why is one of Scotland's highest profile politicians choosing now to stand down as the party's main man in London? Well, let's find out, shall we? Because he joins me now, I'm pleased to say, from Sky. Welcome once again to the Sunday Show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Martin.
Right, 2 weeks ago, you promised that you'd seen off a challenge, that you were going to be the leader of the SNP group in Westminster who led the party out and back up the road to an independent Scotland. And now here we are. What's happened?
Well, you know, you've said, Martin, it's 5.5 years that I've been the leader of the SNP group. It's been a real privilege to do that. I've sat across 4 different Prime Ministers in that time. You know, I've reflected on where we are. We've got a breadth of talent in the party that can come forward at Westminster. But I think crucially is the new role that I'm going to be playing. The First Minister has asked me to be her business ambassador, to engage with the business community as we engage in that debate about Scotland's future, about whether Scotland should be an independent country. I joined the SNP because I want to see Scotland become independent a long time ago, way back in the 1970s. And I'm going to be released to be able to play that role, making sure that I'm carrying forward the research papers that I've been doing, supporting the Scottish Government, the one that I've done on green energy that you and I have talked about before, one that I'm now working on in terms of an industrial strategy, but making sure that we've got the arguments that win us independence. So I'm going to be released to be able to do that job.
We'll come to that job in a minute, but what I really want to get down to is, were you released or were you cut loose? Because every other report I've been reading on this, and people seem to have been leaking and talking, as they often do in Westminster, suggests you were pushed out.
No, I took the decision, Martin. I mean, of course, I've actually stood at 6
Well, hang on, it's totally at odds with what you were saying 2 weeks ago.
Well, look, at the end of the day, we've had the Supreme Court. You've just had a fascinating debate about where the polling is. I need to make sure that my talents are used in the right way to support the government, to support the First Minister. That's what I'll be doing by being back in Scotland, campaigning on the issue of independence while still doing my day job as a member of Parliament. So it's a change of direction. Look, I certainly take the view that if I'd stood this week at the AGM, that I still would have been the SNP Westminster leader. But now is the right time to allow other people to come forward, and for me to make sure that I'm doing everything that I can as we head towards that electoral test, that general election, that we win the argument for Scotland to become an independent.
So all this stuff in the papers about this Tuesday club of football playing, curry eating, beer drinking kind of colleagues of yours is wrong. Is it they didn't come to you and say the time's up, off you go?
I haven't had any meeting where I've been told that the time is up. That hasn't happened. Like any leader of any political party is never going to satisfy everybody all of the time. There's always a range of views. But I think the crucial thing is I've led this group over 5.5 years. We had the second best election result under my leadership in 2019. I can be proud of what we've achieved. And I think the important thing is that we go forward united, using all the talents that we have, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. All
right, we have the idea that 2 groups are emerging within the party to succeed you. One, a kind of a group of people who aren't happy with the direction of travel, with the absolute loyalty to the First Minister and the party up here, and another with Alison Thewliss now standing, a very kind of traditional loyalist pro-Sturgeon group. Do you accept that? And if so, how pivotal a moment is this for the party if you've got 2 groups pulling in different directions?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's 2 groups. I think that there is a question of what is the role of the SNP Westminster Group, and I've always argued that the role of the SNP Westminster Group is to support the government, to support the the First Minister, to make sure that we're amplifying the arguments for Scotland to be an independent country down in
And there's a rump of colleagues who don't agree with that, isn't there? That would be fair.
I think most colleagues would recognise that is what we should be doing, and I think people need to reflect on the fact it's the party, it's the First Minister that's responsible largely for putting everybody into Parliament as an MP. Look, we're knocking on the door of independence. That poll that you were just discussing at 52%, what an opportunity for us to drive that on, to have the discussions about how an independent Scotland would deal with the energy crisis, an energy-rich Scotland where we shouldn't be suffering from the crises that we are because of the failure of UK government energy policy, to make sure that we get back into the European Union, because when you talk about food prices, there's a Brexit impact on all of this. So
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we're on the front foot.
But that
we're
poll's
talking
also telling us that actually, if there was a de facto referendum, according to the results of that one poll, you would lose it. This de facto referendum is beginning to look like a bit of a gamble, isn't it? Do you not think you should be reversing this thing?
Martin, we're very early in this process, and the appeal that I and colleagues would be making to the voters, that if you want Scotland to become independent, as the polls are showing, then there's only one way to do that. We know that there's a significant minority of Labour voters support independence. This will be that choice. That will be the chance that we have to do this. I'm pretty confident that we will build support for independence, and the voters will recognise that by voting SNP, that you can deliver that Scotland that we all want. I relish that challenge, and that's why it's really important that not just me, but other colleagues will be doing the kind of things that I'll be doing, getting out, talking to businesses, talking to communities, showing that Scotland can be a prosperous country back in the European Union.
Sure, I want to talk to you about that, actually, that persuasive message in 1 second. But first, do you think there's any possibility at this summit that's being called in the early spring to discuss the way forward, that actually the de facto referendum plan could be pulled?
I think at the end of the day, the party will be energised by the debate. Look, all of us would much prefer to be facing a referendum for the UK government to recognise, first and foremost, that the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, has a mandate for an independence referendum, to have the gold standard of the Edinburgh Agreement that we had before. That would be the best way to do it, and we need to continue to make that point. But if the alternative is a de facto referendum, that is what we'll have to do. This party is united. It always has been, it always will be. We have a responsibility to lead the people of Scotland, to lead the movement, those that want independence. And I will say to you that's exactly what will come out of that.
OK. Well, you've now got to walk into boardrooms and persuade businesses of the case for independence. I mean, looking at your prospectus, we cut ties with our biggest trading partner. We've got a fairly ambiguous policy on currency at the moment. No lender of last resort for years. We're out of the UK and the EU, possibly for up to a decade, facing all these enormous economic headwinds that are coming our way. You'll be telling your old colleagues at Deutsche Bank that this is the right way to travel, is it?
Well, let's look at the shambles that we have today from the UK government, the crisis that we've just come through over the course of the last period. I mean, I talked about the difficulties in the energy market. Let's just remember that Scotland is energy rich. We shouldn't be facing this energy crisis. Only 14% of our energy comes from gas. Yet the pricing mechanism is determined by gas. Energy rich Scotland, people paying a price, people in fuel poverty. Look, one of the things I'd say
But look at the finances of it, Mr Blackford. I mean, the business community, by and large, I mean, there are obviously a number of pro-independence businesses in Scotland, but by and large, they say they've been ignored and the case doesn't stack up. You've got a job ahead of you, don't you?
Well, but they certainly have not been ignored, and I'll make sure that we engage enthusiastically, effectively with the business community, and important that we listen to them. But let's take this energy example because it's really important, Martin. What we've said in the paper that we published a few weeks ago, that we could increase Scotland's green energy output fivefold between now and 2050, actually deliver 4 times as much green energy as we need. But that's important because it's the jobs that will be created, it's the investment, it's the ability to grow the economy. That's the nuts and bolts, that's the fundamentals. And I firmly believe that when we have that debate with those in the business community, they will see that vision of transforming the Scottish economy, delivering... I
tell you what, we are out of time. Let's have you back on in the next few weeks once you've taken up that ambassadorial role to explore it in more detail. But in the meantime, I've got to say thank you very much indeed for being with us, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Martin.
Right.